Hi, we continue in 1 Samuel 21 today as David leaves behind the priest Ahimelech and Nob and flees to King Achish of Gath, a Philistine. And as we've been exploring, that's a surprising thing. So we're going to have to look at what's going on that he would go from Nob to the enemy king to seek refuge. On the right side of the screen, you can see we've been following this chiasm over here that shows the large picture of the second half of 1 Samuel. And the deep purple part we're in now, we can see David flees to King Achish of Gath here. And in chapter 27, he'll be among the Philistines as a vassal of King Achish. And we'll see that the same memory of the chant that people sung in the streets, Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands, will recur there as well. So not only does that fit the chiastic structure, but it highlights that that's the primary element that the Philistines know about David through his reputation out in the public square. So we'll see how that plays out differently now. When we get to chapter 27, we'll see that as well. We've been also looking at these immediate scenes in this section, chapter 21 to 23, and really chapter 21 to 22 we've been looking at fit together. But this scene here with David and Achish is a break from the scene with David and Abimelech. We won't see David and Abimelech again, but we'll see Saul and Abimelech in chapter 22. So here it's the beginning of David trying to find refuge both for himself and pretty soon we'll see for his family, and also to continue to gather some kind of alternative network to counter King Saul so that when the time really comes for David to take the throne, he's ready to go. He had thought that being a Nob, he had established a relationship with the priests there, and at one level he did, but in the scene that'll happen in 22, we'll see the great slaughter has reduced that to one escapee that David will have to rebuild the priestly relationship with. But that's for chapter 22. So as we've been looking at, there are a number of questions in this section that we need to address, and we looked at a bunch of these in the previous videos, and now we're on these here, number 8 and 9. Why does David leave Nob and go to King Achish? And after leaving Gath, why does he hide in the cave of Adullam? So just a reminder of the locations we're looking at here. Here's Nob, where the last scene took place, and here's Gath over here. And we're going to see that one element of this is area outside of Saul's jurisdiction. So we're going to have to look back at the previous scene to see what it is that's led David to take the risk of going to the enemy as a place of refuge from Saul. So if we go back a previous verse or so, back to verse 9, we see the priest brought up when David asked if he had a sword, since David said he didn't bring a sword, which is a transparently absurd claim that it was too much of a hurry to gather a sword when he went off on the king's errand. So we knew then that there was something else going on. But the priest Ahimelech responds this way: with the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah. And one of the things I noted last time was that his naming the Valley of Elah, which is unnecessary to the story, highlights that Ahimelech has been paying attention to David and that he recognizes David's victory over Goliath and that therefore Yahweh has appointed him to be the king. But it also does something else. It also suggests here that given Doeg in the room and given Ahimelech certainly knowing that Doeg works for Saul, and the conversation that we just saw in the previous scene is one designed to keep Doeg from reporting to Saul that Ahimelech and perhaps his fellow priests have chosen to side with David, he's telling him in a coded way where to go next. In other words, to go to the home of Goliath, which is Gath. And that's what we knew about Goliath. He was from Gath, and so that's where he goes in our immediate scene here. One of the interesting things as I scroll down a little bit to bring more of our immediate scene up, it says, David arose and fled that day from Saul, even though Saul is not there. Doeg was there and Ahimelech was there, but it implies that we know that Doeg is working for Saul. He went to King Achish of Gath. Notice what's not being said. It doesn't say Philistines. It doesn't say Philistines anywhere in this little scene. Not only that, it refers to King Achish, which is the only named king of the Philistines throughout the entire Hebrew Bible. And otherwise, the Philistines are noted not to have a monarchy, but to have a council of 5 lords. One example, the last time we saw it was back in 7:7. Let's look at that right now briefly. So we can see when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And we'll see that again near the very end of the book in chapter 29, as the lords of the Philistines were passing on by the hundreds and thousands. David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish, the commander of the Philistines. So we'll see Achish one more time, but notice he's not described as a king there. He's described simply as with Achish, one of the commanders of the Philistines. So it's only here and in chapter 27 that he's referred to as king, and that any Philistine is referred to as king, which suggests to me and to many other readers here that this recognizes that the issue is kingship. Just like David had said that he was on a mission from the king, and we recognize that Doeg could hear that as Saul, but we as readers could hear that as Yahweh. So now the question is David and Achish as king, which the servants of Achish recognize, and the first thing they say, the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land?" So already they're recognizing that David is the king of what land, we don't know. Polza notes below that once David receives Goliath's hidden sword, he is acclaimed as king, but Reese argues the opposite, that the sword is a ruse to fool Doeg. It would be too big for David and stupid to bring to Gath, and that's what I noted last time. Further, what the land means is left open. And certainly in the land they're in Gath, that would be Philistine land. They're certainly not suggesting that David has authority to be king over them, but the only other land in view is the land around here where Saul has been. So they're at least recognizing that David, not Saul, is king, and that would be to David's advantage. But then they continue. Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And we recognize that as echoing back from chapter 18. We can see it back there. And the women sang to one another as they made merry after he's come back from killing Goliath. And so that we saw at the time led Saul to be upset at David and be jealous and seek to have him killed. But now David recognizes the fact that the servants of Achish, again not referred to as the Philistines, have heard this, recognize that David may well be seen as a threat. And in chapter 27, when we look at the other side of the chiasm, that's explicitly that will happen. The lords, the fellow, not the lords, but the fellow servants of Achish will tell him to send David away and not trust him to work for them because he's been loyal to the Israelites in his previous battles. And of course, the thousands and tens of thousands he's killed were mostly Philistines, if not exclusively. One of the underlying elements of this whole element of this story of David and Achish here, with Achish here in Gath and in Gath here, from Baruch Halpern in his larger takedown of the story of David as a cover-up for David's violence, is that David may well have been working for the Philistines all this time until Saul was dead, and that the story is covering that up while acknowledging a little piece of it, denying what would be anathema to any Israelite that he'd worked for the enemy, but at that moment he had nothing else to do. So we'll see in chapter 27, we'll have to revisit this question. But for the moment, we hear this response from David. He took these words to heart, which conveys the Hebrew almost exactly literally, and was very much afraid of King Achish of Gath. This is the first time we're hearing anything about David's emotions, and he's afraid. Literally, as my note below says, was very afraid of the face of King Achish. And as Bodner notes below, providing an inside glimpse into David's heart for the first time in the story. And so what is David going to do when he's afraid of this king to whom he's gone, apparently hoping that he would be unrecognized and seek refuge there? He changed his behavior before them and acted the madman and succeeds at that. And that tells us something very interesting about David's character, that like Ronald Reagan or Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's pretty good if a politician is an actor and can convey a behavior that is not his true behavior to convince people of what he wants to convince them of. And that's what he's successful in here. And the curious thing for readers as we go is the narrator's telling us here that he pretended to be mad. We'll look more closely at it in a minute. But what does it suggest about all the other times that David does things, like when Saul and Jonathan die and he sings their praises, that he's acting like a politician, saying what the people need to hear, or at other times what the army needs to hear, but not necessarily what he's really thinking and believing, which is almost possible to discern from someone in the public sphere. So the narrator is giving us this cue we couldn't otherwise have gotten, that it was fear that generates what we see here. And this is a lie. We saw him make the previous lie here at 1917. We can go back to that, around the question of Michal lying on behalf of David. So we've already seen that lies are part of protecting David here. So he changed his behavior. The word here, shana, which is only one other time in the Deuteronomistic history, can imply disguise, but it doesn't have to mean that. Behavior here, interestingly, the word for this is taste or judgment. It's really not broadly behavior. It's only here in one other time in the Deuteronomistic history. But it's changing his taste or judgment, but implied by that is behavior, as the New Revised Standard suggests. Before them are literally in their eyes, and that's what's important. Just like he was afraid in the king's eyes, he doesn't want them to see the fear in his eyes. He wants them to see that he's crazy before their eyes. So that's what he does here. And we hear that he pretended to be mad. This is one word here. Only here in the Deuteronomistic history in the Torah, but 15 times in the Masoretic text. And the particular hitfatel stem that we have here, it can mean exactly what it says, pretended to be mad or insane, when in their presence or in their hands. And so it's suggesting that he's in their hands, although we don't know exactly where, because what he does is scratch marks in the door of the gate, which suggests he's still at the gate of Gath, that he hasn't entered the city at all yet. So he's in their hands at one level, not literally, but certainly under their control. And exactly what he's trying to do is get out of their control. So he scratches marks on the door. It's doubled. The verb is doubled here for emphasis. He scratched, yes, scratched, we might say, marks on the door of the gate. And as my note below here says from Fackelman, behind the gates lies freedom. The picture contains the inexorable hardness of the great gate and the walls next to it, against which the weak efforts of a poor madman can avail nothing. So it suggests that David plainly is caught here, and unless his ruse works, he doesn't have a very good future here in Gath. But having scratched the marks of the doors, let his spittle run down his beard, spittle only one other time in the Hebrew Bible, Achish is taken in by it. He said to his servants, notice not King Achish here, but just Achish, look, using the henna, behold, you see the man is mad. And I notice a different word here and in these three instances. It's shug, which comes out in the Yiddish that I grew up with as meshuga. It's interesting that the root word has translated over 3,000 years into current day Yiddish to highlight someone who's acting like a crazy person. The meshugana, as my grandmother would have said. Look, the man is meshugana. Why have you brought him to me? And that's also an interesting point, because we hadn't seen that the servants brought him to Achish. We'd only seen that David showed up and the servants recognized him from and quoted the song that the women were singing in the streets. So he blames the servants for this, even though we had not seen anything that suggested it was the servants' idea to bring him in. But he continues with an interesting response. Do I lack madmen? Implying that Gath is full of madmen. And that's a curious thing. We don't know why that would be and why he would feel that, but it's an interesting suggestion. There's a bunch of meshuganas in Gath. That you have brought this fellow, using the pejorative zeh, which is a disdainful word there to say, to play the madman in my presence, or literally in my face. Shall this fellow, using zeh again, come into my house? Which is, of course, a double entendre as well. Both the literal house of Achish, where he lives, but also the house of Achish, as we'll see, the house of David, his monarchy, his realm of power. So the issue plainly is that the king of the land is a madman, and he will not become part of the Philistine presence, although not named as Philistines here, which leads David to escape, although it doesn't say they let him go. He apparently did let go, and escape to the cave of Adullam when he finds his family and is reunited to them, where his next task will be to protect them and to continue to try to build up the network of anybody who would choose to side with him over against the king. And that's where we'll go next time, into the exciting adventure in chapter 22. See you then. Bye-bye.